Some of us can remember Erie in its golden age, an era when the Boston Store, Union Station, and Koehler Brewery were all an integral part of our lives. Join us on a trip down memory lane and marvel at the tremendous growth of the Boston Store. Trace the family legacy of Koehler beer and explore the renewed interest in the Union Station. Sit back, relax, and take a stroll with us back in time.
We always made sure that we had the best values that we could find for our customers. This is why the Boston Store will long be remembered for what it did. It was always there for the customer that needed a certain thing. We had it. We were basically a merchandise store of that type.
When you get down to it, it's a people business, and that's what it takes to get a job done. You need the cooperation and the energizing of those people to excite them, to sell the products to the customer, to make your living in the community that the Boston Store was known for.
I'll tell you, honestly, I would have worked for nothing. I liked my job so well, I would have worked for nothing if I could have afforded it. It was just a pleasure to go to work every day.
There were people who worked 30, 40, 50 years there, so you know that their heart and soul was in that particular area. I just wish that things would have turned out differently, but they didn't, and I just hope and pray that someday we'll see the building utilized for the benefit of the community so that everyone will have fond memories of the Boston Store as I do.
In 1855, Elijah H. Mack stepped from a train at Union Station and into the celebrated history of one of the greatest retail establishments Erie has ever known. The 27-year-old businessman had a mercantile dream to take over a little downtown store and make Erie his home. Boston, Massachusetts was an enormous European port of entry, and in the late 1800s, the city was heralded as a center of fashion culture and commerce. Mack named his new shop the Boston Store.
I don't think there'll ever be another store like the Boston Store because it had everything, and it was so nice to shop there. And their merchandise, they always stood behind their merchandise. If you didn't like a thing, you could bring it back a year later, and they would make it good, and give you a new one or whatever you wanted. That was one nice thing about it. They certainly stood behind their merchandise.
Mack's tiny dry goods store at 1604 Peach had one door, two display windows, lighted by gas jets, and supported 8 employees. By 1935, on the occasion of its 50th anniversary, the Boston Store had grown into a 6-story building with over 500,000 square feet of floor space, windows on 7th, 8th, Peach, and State Streets, over 70 departments, and more than 500 employees.
One of my fondest and earliest memories of the Boston Store is how Mother and I every Saturday would take the bus downtown. We'd go to the Boston Store, we'd go up to the Tower Dining Room, and if you didn't have a reservation, you would have to wait at least an hour to be seated. They had both dining rooms wide open, and I remember Elizabeth McKee with her hat and her gloves, the perfectly dressed lady, and her fashion shows. And Mother and I would have lunch every Saturday and watch the fashion shows. And then after that, walk through the store. I remember the immense toy department on the 5th floor. I mean, it took up the whole 5th floor. And there were just so many people. I mean, there were so many people that you could hardly move on a Saturday.
Golly, the first memory that I have of the Boston Store was in 1937. I was 12 years old, and my grandmother took me over to the Boston Store to the toy department. And of course, like all boys at 12 years old, the first thing I wanted to see were the trains. And after the trains, we went over and looked at the beautiful, most beautiful bicycles you ever saw in the world. And I even remember the name. They were Roadmaster bicycles, and that was always a goal of mine to have a Roadmaster bicycle, but they were pretty expensive.
Back in 1937, when I first started at the Boston store, I was only 21 years old, and it was really a day of days. I was very, very afraid that I would not be able to do it, afraid of when I had to wait on my first customer, and in those days you had to take and make out a sales check, put it in a tube, and send it to the tube room, and wait for you to get your money back. That's how we transacted business with the customers at that point.
The history of the Boston store was a history of firsts for Erie. The department store inaugurated the first trade excursion in the state. In cooperation with the Bessemer Railroad, the store paid the fare for people from as far away as Greenville to shop in Erie, with return tickets available at the Boston store.
They would have sales at different times of the year, not always a sale like seems to be the thing today. They would have a special sale for a special reason.
Well, they had what they called sample shoes.
Oh yeah.
They were salesmen that carried size 4 or 4.5, and when the season was over, he would bring them in, or Mr. Koshik, who was the buyer of the shoe department, would buy the shoes, and they'd be placed on tables. And it was interesting to watch the women standing at the front doors and the side doors, and as soon as those doors were opened, those women would rush to the counters, and we looked at their feet, and they might have been size 6, 8, and 10, and they tried to get their feet into a size 4 or 4.5. After, it lasted maybe about an hour and a half, and when the rush was over and they left, our job was to go back and match the shoes in pairs, and many times we would find where some of the ladies had left their old shoes and walked out of the store with new shoes and had not paid for them.
Well, that was real Depression days, and that was not uncommon.
No.
The Boston store provided the first home delivery system in Erie.
Everything was delivered. If you wanted to buy a spool of thread and you didn't want to go out in the cold winter weather, you called the Boston store and you ordered the thread. And 9 times out of 10, the girl in that department would try to match the color over the telephone. That was not unusual. And they would deliver a spool of thread to your home. Wasn't that right? Yeah. Mr. Featherstone, I think that was his name.
He was in charge of the delivery department.
A great place to work. People there were like a family. We knew everybody. We treated everybody. And of course, naturally, our customers were our people. And we did everything we could to make sure they were satisfied. We never let them leave the store if they weren't satisfied.
The Boston store was the first company in Erie to provide its employees with a half holiday by closing on Friday afternoons during the summer months.
We were a family at the Boston store. Whatever we could do for one another, we did, and we got along very well. Everybody knew each other. Everybody did everything they could for one another.
It just seemed like it was home. You never had to worry about getting up in the morning and hating to go to work, because when I got up in the morning, I would look forward to going to work. In all those years, it was like going home and being among friends.
We had a stockman who was the life of the party, and he had retired from from the gas company, and he did many things for us. One thing he did that was very hilarious was he had to get new dentures, so he hung his old dentures up from the ceiling in the basement stockroom and put a for sale sign on it.
The atmosphere of the Boston store was always on an upbeat. There was always sales promotions going on that excited people. There were different skits that we would have in the morning before the store would open. The attitude of the people was always on an upgrade. And in my department, in the housewares department, I worked with a lot of people who could have been my mother at the time, and appreciated the guidance and the patience they had with me since I was a young person of age 21 at that particular time.
We'd have skits we'd put on among the employees. It just, it was just like a holiday every day you went to work.
The store became a cultural and civic hub of Erie.
There's another atmosphere at the Boston store, and that was the friendliness that was shown by the clerks and also by the customers, because there used to be a balcony on the first floor, and the ladies, when they got tired of shopping, they would go up and sit and look over the balcony at the people coming in the State Street entrance to see if their friends were coming in, because they were supposed to meet at the Boston store clock.
Under the clock.
Under the clock.
That was called the mezzanine, Bill.
That's right.
That
mezzanine.
was kind of between the first and second floor.
I would say one of the most memorable events was Ladies' Day. This was a day that was set aside for all of the ladies to assume the positions of all of the male executives. And we ran the store, and I must say we did run it very successfully. It took months to prepare. Everyone came in early in the morning. Everyone set everything out, all ready to go. People were lined up, 25 deep, waiting to get in. And when the doors opened, it was just mass, chaotic confusion. And I mean, you were lucky if you could even go to the bathroom that day. You don't see sales like that anymore. The fun and the excitement that generated, I think, is probably gone forever.
The selection and customer service of the Boston store were second to none.
Another unusual feature that they had, which I don't think any store ever has now, are starters at the elevators.
Oh, that's right.
The girls would direct the person if the elevator was crowded or thought it was going to be crowded. She'd say number 1, and then you'd get on the elevator, and the operator then would give you the merchandise that was being sold on that particular floor.
By the time the escalators were added in 1953, the store was the retail, civic, and cultural center of the area. Greater expansion was expected, and no one anticipated anything but continued success for the Boston store. The Associated Dry Goods Company purchased the store in 1959 for almost $2 million. It went on to open the West Erie Plaza branch in 1968 and the Mill Creek Mall branch in 1974. Also in 1974, the Boston store was one of only 3 retailers in the country to win the Esquire BSA Business in the Arts Award. The store supported such community organizations as the Erie Philharmonic and the Erie Civic Ballet, the Erie International Institute, the Erie Summer Festival of the Arts, and the Erie Public Broadcasting Affiliate, WQLN. But the expansion and community support would take their toll.
Whenever I go by the Boston store now, it just makes me sick to think of all the good times I had there, and I can still think about going for the bus every night, coming out that one door especially.
In 1977, the Joseph Horn Company, a Pittsburgh-based division of Associated Dry Goods interested in expanding into the Erie market, acquired corporate control of the Boston store, but they could not maintain the overhead of the downtown Erie store.
I don't really know precisely what caused the Boston store to close down. As I recall, when I was there, the Boston store was a profitable store, percentage-wise. Quite obviously, percentages are not the bottom line as far as dollars are concerned, and I'm sure that some of the larger stores with a smaller percentage of profit turned in a lot more dollars, and consequently, perhaps you might use that as a ruler to measure the success of a store. But I do know one thing: it didn't close up because of the people who worked there, and it didn't close up because the people of Erie didn't love to go there. And I'm sure it closed up strictly as a matter of economics, and that's something that was not decided in Erie. That's something that was decided in New York City.
At 5:30 on July 7th, 1979, the downtown Boston store closed its doors for the last time. After 94 years as a retail and civic monument for the city of Erie, the Boston store's signature clock and vacant storefronts were all that remained.
When I walk past the Boston store now with the windows boarded up and the graffiti painted on the front of it, it is really depressing. It would just really be nice if some developer could come in and do something with that beautiful building. It just has so many memories for so many people in Erie that it just is really a shame for it to be empty and useless and boarded up.
The day that the store closed, how all of us came in and all we did was just walk through the store, walk through the stock rooms, walk through the departments, looked at all the stuff that was there, and just trying to engrave in our minds how the store looked then, because we knew that we would never see the store the same again.
I went down to the last day that the store was going to be open, and they auctioned off all the shelving and all the lighting fixtures and anything, the carpeting, anything that they could remove from the store got auctioned off. When I say auctioned off, I use the word because that's what they called it, but they gave it away. They gave the stuff away in that store. But they were interested in getting out quickly, and consequently, when the store closed up, that was a sad day. We purchased a couple items that we've kept at our store just as mementos of the Boston store, and whenever I see them, and they're still there, whenever I see them at the store, it brings back that auction. And, that was, to me, that was the funeral. That was the funeral. It had everything but a ceremony and flowers. But that was the funeral. That was the day that downtown Erie died.
The West Erie and Mill Creek Mall stores are still open as branches of Horns. Over the years since the downtown Boston store closed, there have been many attempts to renovate the building and capitalize on the existing structure and its long-standing association with a prosperous city of Erie. To date, the store stands little changed from the day it closed, an empty reminder of a bygone era, a memorial marker for the old center of Erie.
My first recollection of coming down here, and I always called it the Depot. That was the common name then. It's Union Station, but we always called it the Depot. It was 1939, and I was 10 years old. My father was a cab driver, and in those days, the cab drivers didn't have telephones or two-way radios in their cars, so they lined up out in front of the train station, and they actually dressed like a chauffeur. They had nice uniforms, they were well trained, and it was considered a very good job. My dad is Frank Harmley, and he was a cab driver working out of here for 22 years. 1939, I was 10 years old, I came here, and one of the first things I remember, and I don't understand why anybody let me do it, but I would skate up and down the concourse of this station on roller skates, and nobody stopped me, nobody said anything about it. But it was a fun place to be. There was always a lot of activity.
Railroads were the prime source of travel for people, and the passenger station in a city was looked on as the entrance to the city. Therefore, the people wanted the station to be as imposing as possible to impress visitors and friends as they arrived. That was some of the agitation that created the demand for the new Union Station in Erie, which was completed in 1927.
It's really a nostalgic draw for a lot of people. In fact, we've carried a theme throughout the whole renovation called The Way It Was All Over Again.
Known as the Taj Mahal of transportation, the present Union Station was designed by renowned rail station architects Alfred Fellheimer and Stuart Wagner at a cost of $3 million. The imposing three-story Art Deco structure was built to accommodate Erie's 20th century booming population and economy.
The new Union Station opened in December of 1927. There was quite a celebration, including a parade through the city and a dance in the station before it actually opened for business.
The first passengers to travel through the station were treated to a grand vision of exquisite style and service. Botticino marble wainscoting, met by marble terrazzo flooring, led the station's patrons to nationwide destinations. Lighting fixtures created especially for the station hung from the dome ceilings and illuminated the way to travel luxuries, such as a soda fountain, barber shop, newsstand, telegraph office, and even a resident dentist. Travelers sat on grand mahogany benches as they waited for their trains, while the redcaps stood by attending the patrons at all hours of the day.
It's hard to believe when we stand here and look at it now, but all those windows where it says tickets, and there's little brass racks, maybe you can't see them, but they're right under the ticket window. People would come up and sit their piece of luggage on there and buy their ticket. But on any given day, you would come in and you would have to stand in line at all of those windows. That's how busy they were. We're looking at the area that says telegraph and parcel check. That was a very busy department. And especially, again, I keep referring back to wartime, but that's when this train station was really full. People would get off the train and want to send a telegram or check to see if they got a package. But during the war, they turned that area into a USO. Now we're looking at the area that says baggage check. Well, you can't picture it now, but it was a wide open area, and they had a counter, and your luggage would be checked into there and then taken up to the train, unless you wanted to carry it on yourself.
The waiting rooms were on the ground level, and the tracks were located above. That meant the passengers had to climb stairs to get to their trains, and the redcaps were in great demand.
22 eastbound and 22 westbound trains traveled the Erie tracks every day during the second decade of the 1900s. But the difficult financial conditions, growth of the number of privately owned automobiles, and the increased miles of paved road prevalent during the Great Depression led to a decrease in passenger demand for the country's railroads. However, Union Station managed to survive the reduced number of trains stopping at its platform, and when the United States entered World War II, Union Station experienced a heyday in passenger travel never surpassed.
The Union Station in Erie saw its greatest use during the Second World War, when thousands of soldiers departed from the station to go into the service, and then later returned on furloughs to visit their friends and families in the city.
Mostly what I recall about the station is the sad times, World War II, and when this place was so busy and so full of people, but it was also filled with a lot of tears, because mothers, fathers, wives, families were coming here to say goodbye to their sons or brothers or husbands that were going off to war. One day, one of my friends called me and she said, you better hurry over to 14th Street, which is where they usually unloaded, not passengers, but when the circuses all came to town, they unloaded at 14th and Peach. And this particular day, she said, oh no, you have to come, they're unloading German prisoners. Well, I was 12 years old then, and I thought, oh my, I'm going to see some kind of monsters, you know, because at that age we thought this is the enemy. And I'll never forget that I went down to 14th Street and they unloaded these boys, and they were just boys. They were 17, 18-year-old German prisoners. They were unloading them from the train and putting them on trucks, and they were going to work in the harvest.
During the war, rail transportation was the most economical and sensible travel option. In the face of the country's fuel, rubber, and steel rationing, and the privileged expense of both cars and the new commercial flying machines, citizens flooded America's rail stations.
The private car had just begun becoming commonplace, and most inner-city transportation was done by the railroads as far as passengers were concerned.
After the war, the railway lines using Union Station, financially strengthened by the booming war economy, re-equipped themselves with modern cars and locomotives. Erie drew celebrities and politicians from all over the country, and they all came through Union Station.
All the big stars that came to Erie for shows, and there were a lot of them, they would come, and when our dad would come home from work at night, that's the first thing we'd ask him is, who did you see today? Well, he would tell their name, but he would always make some kind of good or bad remark, and his remarks on whether they were good or bad was how big a tip they gave him. But usually, instead of a tip, they gave him tickets to the show. And as an example, my father was driving cab and got the stars from the train station and took them down the night the Warner Theater opened, which is about 60 years ago. So we were always impressed on who he saw. I was lucky enough to see President Roosevelt when he was campaigning for probably his second or third term, but because he was a handicapped person, he didn't actually come down into the depot. They pulled his private car and stopped it, his train car stopped it at the tracks, so everybody went up to the tracks. But when other people came, like presidential candidates or any celebrity, they would go upstairs, and there was a dentist up here, and it just happened to be that his office overlooked the canopy out front. So the Secret Service would always come, take over his office, and clear the way so the candidate could go out.
The automotive industry was feeding the post-war American hunger for a private leisure travel with affordable new cars. The railroads lost precious ground to the interstate highway system, and the dawning of the jet age led to a sharp decline in the demand for passenger rail travel. By 1971, no passenger trains stopped at Erie's Union Station.
Beginning in the early 50s, the station began to become less and less crowded. The number of trains stopping at the station became fewer and fewer, and that in turn meant fewer and fewer passengers, and it was just an endless circle of decline. When Amtrak came on the scene in May of 1971, there were no passenger trains calling at Union Station. For the first time since the railroads came to Erie in the 1850s, there were no passenger trains through Erie, no passenger trains that people could ride, no trains to take them to their destination.
I was approached in early 1990 by a demolition contractor that I've done some business with in the past from the Cleveland area. He received notification from Conrail that they wanted to demolish this structure. So he teamed up with me, we got inside of it, and we decided to approach Conrail to see whether there was any interest in selling the building. We negotiated with Conrail for a little bit over a year and finally purchased Union Station in September of '91.
Mike Davis and his partner Rick Summers fell in love with the old Union Station. They formed the Union Station Development Corporation and purchased the 92,000 square foot site from Conrail. They took a phased approach to the renovation, modernizing areas of the building as they were purchased.
Basically, we're in the project for long term. It's market driven. The more tenants we get, the more polished it becomes. We hope to be able to fill the entire complex in, say, two years.
When we took over the Union Station, we tried to incorporate a lot of the history that was surrounding the building and the old lines that used to run through Erie. The room you see here is named after the old Empire State Express line, the commuter line that used to run through Erie. Some of our other rooms are named, our banquet rooms are named after the Penn Central, or as most of the railroad people call it, the Pennsy line, the New York Central line. We also have a room named after the A&E line and the Renova line.
We recently condoed the western building, which is 40,000 square feet. It runs from Sassafras to the middle of the block. We're negotiating with the city of Erie and the Erie Senior Health to sell them 17,000 square feet for their new facility. That facility will house the senior center and senior health.
The clientele with whom we work remember this complex as a healthy and vital part of the downtown Erie community. Many of them can talk childhood memories as well as adult memories as to what important role this played in their lives, and to be able to now return to this place and have it again be a part of their daily routine is real important to them.
What we're trying to do with this building is turn it into a mini-type meeting and convention center that offers dining and meeting facilities with a little bit of historic flair.
And rail travel may come back in vogue once again. With cost and design improvements in modern high-speed train equipment, America's transportation preferences are swinging slowly back towards mass transit and long-distance railroad travel. Union Station may just have another great heyday in its future.
His gun, a hand-tooled 12-gauge. His beer, why, Koehler, of course. He knows quality. He knows you can pay more, but you can't buy a better beer. There is no better beer anywhere at any price.
Koehler was a main force in the Erie community in support of charities and hospitals. Koehler was essentially a family concern, and its officers consisted of the family, the King family, the Maginot family, and the Bloss family, and the Kurtzy family also.
The story of the Koehler Brewery began in 1840 when Charles Koehler and his wife left Haarlem, Holland, and their lives as tulip growers to open a small brewery at 26th and Holland Streets in Erie. The formation of the brewery and its ensuing success with the city of Erie continued to be a family affair for the next 130 years. By the beginning of the 20th century, the Koehler Brewery had consolidated with or bought out other local breweries until it was the dominant brewery in Erie and one of only 3 breweries in Pennsylvania that made beer up to exacting German standards. All the while, the family focus endured.
A.L. Kurtze was president before my father. Before them was Jackson Koehler and Fred Koehler. Then later on, I became president. My cousin Fred Bloss was treasurer and chairman. I began working at Koehler's in 1941 after graduation from the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School and later the Siebel Institute of Brewing in Chicago. I began working in the office in various capacities and also worked in the plant, in production, and in the brewing department. In the early 1890s, the management of the brewery, or Jackson Koehler and other brewers, felt there was going to be outside competition, and in order to strengthen their position, they decided to consolidate. Taken into the consolidation to make the Erie Brewing Company were the Fred Koehler Brewery, the Cascade Brewery, Liebel Brewery, the Conrad Brewery, and these were put into the consolidation. Other breweries had gone by the boards, like the Frog Brewery, the Volk Brewery, over a long time ago. But this consolidation resulted in the Erie Brewing Company and strengthened its position in the city as the leading beer. The Dutch Touch was an advertising theme that the agency felt would identify Koehler with its founder, who came from Haarlem, Holland, in the 1840s. It was to distinguish it from other beers, to show that there was more body and distinctive hop character to the beer.
Throughout the turn of the century, Prohibition, the Great Depression, and 2 World Wars, the Koehler family and its adopted city grew together. The brewery and its community prospered by supporting one another.
Prohibition was what we considered the seizure of assets. In order to survive with such a big plant and its overhead, my father decided to go into the ice business and set up various ice stations throughout the city, and also to go into the soft drink business. The products were Brownie, a chocolate drink, Imperial Ginger Ale, and Birch Beer, and so on. And these products helped carry the load and keep the brewery going through the Prohibition era. We also made a beer called Near Beer, which was 0.5% alcohol. And it did not have the full body of the regular beer, but it helped the brewery survive. Koehler promoted many scholarships in the city: Fort Gannon, Penn State Barron, Allegheny, Teal, and other local colleges.
During its most prosperous years, Erie Brewing produced more than 10,000 cases of Koehler beer each day. In 1951, the company was the only remaining brewery in Erie and by the late 60s, the little Koehler Brewery of the 1840s had expanded its brewing, warehouse, and distribution facilities into one of the largest businesses in Erie. By 1974, Erie Brewing was the city's top taxpayer and one of Erie's most prolific civic supporters.
We hired people, students in the summer, so they could earn money for tuition, and we supported the hospitals and many of the local charities.
And the Erie Brewing Company made great beer. For several years running, the company was awarded the Gold Medal of Quality from the Investigation Center and Sales Promotion of Brussels, Belgium, the Nobel Prize of the brewing industry. Their promotional tactics, including the purchase of the Koehler polar bears for the Erie Zoological Society, the creation of Uncle's Day holiday, and the establishment of the Koehler Advisory Sports Council featuring prominent national sports figures, all contributed to the strength of the brewery.
Koehler had this sports council, and we conducted seminars for the people of Erie and the sports-minded groups of Erie. And one affair was held at the Erie Stadium, Memorial Stadium. The Koehler Curtsey Foundation was set up by Rose Curtsey, daughter of Fred Koehler, and able to support and aid the local hospitals through income from the foundation. I believe the Koehler polars came from a zoo in Europe, probably Norway, and it was our thought to contribute them to the Erie Zoo as a community project. The Uncle Jackson campaign was promoted by the Lando Agency of Pittsburgh in an attempt to personalize and make Koehler beer a distinctive from other beers and other advertising. Uncle Jackson character was portrayed by Gordon Clark of New York City, who was a bit actor in movies and other commercials. It was to emphasize Jackson Koehler, my grandfather, and his influence in the industry. The brewery's distribution area consisted of about 350 to 400 miles, going east to Philadelphia and south of Pittsburgh, and New York State, Rochester, Buffalo, and all the environs. The distribution was limited by Lake Erie, unfortunately. We could not sell to Canada.
His gun, a hand-tooled 12-gauge. His beer, why, Koehler, of course. He knows quality. He knows you can pay more, but you can't buy a better beer. There is no better beer anywhere at any price.
Despite their marketing programs and increased distribution, the brewery could not compete with the larger national breweries. On March 10, 1978, the Erie Brewing Company closed its 22nd and State Street doors for the last time.
Koehler closed in 1978 due to very overwhelming competition by strong national breweries and regional breweries. It was a part of the trend that has been ongoing in this country of the larger breweries getting larger and the smaller ones unable to compete and come up with the advertising dollars that are necessary to keep promotions alive. We were not able to achieve the production economies of the Anheuser-Busch and other big breweries. Therefore, because our home markets were besieged by these national and regional breweries, we were unable to sustain and make a profit. The copyrights and marketing rights for Koehler were sold to the Schmidt Brewing Company of Philadelphia, where it was brewed for some time in Cleveland and Philadelphia, and is now brewed in Pittsburgh at the Iron City Brewery plant.
The closure of the Erie Brewing Company signaled an end to the small European-style brewery so predominant in the first half of the 20th century in America. But Koehler is not dead. The Koehler equipment is still functioning in prominent breweries in Europe, Jamaica, Canada, and Australia. Remnants of the Koehler spirit live on as regional U.S. breweries, too small to compete with national producers, create new quality brews in the tradition of forefathers like the Koehler family.